There we go. We're being recorded. So I'm Donald Gusisala, Program Manager with the Discoverability Network at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. I'm going to be going through a roadmap to disability inclusion, hiring people with disabilities using the Discoverability Network's roadmap tool as our guide and reference point. So let me just start sharing my screen here. So I do have a presentation, or I should say a slide deck to accompany my presentation. So you should see my slide deck in full screen now. And this roadmap, the steps we're going to go through are listed on the Discoverability Network website as a resource for employers to access. So if there's any desire to follow up on any of the material here, you can access this tool on our website, discoverability.network. There will be a link to that in the presentation as well. So I know we went through some of this last time, so I'll be brief, but just to recap some of the competitive advantages that businesses can expect when hiring people with disabilities. You can expect higher employee retention. People with disabilities have on average up to 72% higher retention rates. Accommodations, which is a common misconception. Actually, 95% of accommodations are not for disability-related reasons. And as far as accommodations for disabilities are concerned, 60% cost nothing, and 90% are a one-time cost of $500 or less. Only 37% of employees with disabilities actually require a workplace accommodation, so the majority don't. When it comes to capacity, the Discoverability Network is here to support. As I mentioned, you can use our roadmap tool on our website. There are other resources available to businesses there, as well as, of course, the opportunity to post jobs on our job matching platform and be connected to candidates. So you see more statistics around the key benefits of hiring inclusively here, and the retention rate. People with disabilities, 90% of them rate average or better in job performance, 98% average or better in health and safety. So those are not areas that there should be concerns. Attendance, 86% of employees with disabilities rate average or better. So again, as I like to highlight, when you combine higher retention with higher attendance, you have lower employee turnover and lower absenteeism, which means a reduction in operating costs or overhead costs, and an ability to reinvest that money into business growth and development. So it is a winning proposition. Now, what we're going to go through today are these 5 steps of the discoverability roadmap. Step 1, asking the person. Step 2, finding talent with a difference, so the way you're going to source talent. Step 3, interviewing and hiring inclusively and considerations you might make. Step 4, what onboarding would look like if you're being as accessible as possible. And step 5, disclosure and accommodations, how you can handle those conversations and what the purpose is. So we'll get into more detail about each topic. Now, to begin with, when you are interacting with really anybody, that has a lived experience that is different from what you're used to, whether they're a person with a disability, a person from a different culture, a person with a different religion, any other number of things. Could be someone who's a vegan, right? People who just live different lifestyles from you. It's important to ask the person, right? So we worry that we have not much experience communicating and interacting with people with disabilities, or people who are have lifestyles that we're unfamiliar with, and that's fine. When it comes to disability, the important thing is to ask questions. If you're not sure, make sure that you are being, you're providing alternatives, that you are accessible and inclusive, and that you are, you're welcoming and accepting of people's differences. So you see some stats there. 1 in 5 Canadians self-identifying as having a disability. That's 20% of the population. And as far as visible versus invisible disabilities, 71% have invisible disabilities. So you're not going to know necessarily just by looking at them. So one of the useful ways to think about disability, or rethink disability, is to stop thinking about it as a personal health condition and look at it as mismatched human interactions. And the reason for this is we can solve mismatched interactions, right? We can't solve for somebody's health condition. That's not our place. We're not doctors. We're not their care professionals. And the point is, we're not trying to fix people. What we're trying to do is fix the mismatched interactions so that people can be productive and participate in the workplace. So we can provide tools, we can make changes that enable a person with a disability to do their job more effectively. And that is what we refer to as an accommodation. As businesses, you're already experts in accommodations. I mentioned that 95% of accommodation requests have nothing to do with disability. They're for family, religious, childcare, personal, and other reasons. So it's important to stop thinking about accommodations for disability as a matter apart from other accommodations that are provided by businesses. Now, when it comes to the true cost of accommodations, you can see again some of the statistics on the screen here. I mentioned that 90% of accommodations are a one-time cost of $500 or less, and 60% cost nothing. You see a little bit more of a breakdown here. They think an important one is the $28.69 return for every dollar invested in accommodations. And that makes sense if you think about the increased retention and lower absenteeism that you can expect to see from people with disabilities. So accommodations are clearly provide a rather significant return on investment for the business. When it comes to sourcing talent, you want to be trying to find it in diverse places. You don't want to be recruiting from the same talent pools in the same places all the time. You want to get the best talent. You want to get the people who are going to be most interested and committed and productive in your workplace. And so you want to use multiple sources. One could be the Discoverability Network. You see the link to our website there. You can post jobs on our platform for free and have your job matched to candidates that are a fit for your role based on the qualifications that you list and their interest in your position. You can also contact disability-specific organizations or employment service providers. There are guaranteed to be some operating in your community. You see a list of some here. These ones may not be operating in your community specifically, but if you look up employment service providers or employment services for people with disabilities, you will find organizations in your community that are working with talent pools. And these organizations can provide a great recruitment assist. They can provide a steady access to talent. They can help create targeted pipelines through partnerships with you, and they provide supports to candidates both on and off the job, as well as the business itself with respect to augmenting training, identifying accommodations, and many other things. So when you're recruiting with a difference, it's important not to look for things that don't exist. So you see here, avoid purple cow job ads, I should say, because purple cows don't exist. What this reminds me of, I don't know if anyone here remembers, there were commercials when I was a kid about closet hippos, and it was making the same point. It was this fake documentary type commercial talking about the lifestyles of closet hippos, and then pointed out that closet hippos don't exist, and you wouldn't believe in such a thing or look for it. So why do you believe in other things that are, clearly not part of reality? And this is the same sort of example. You don't want to look for closet hippos or purple cows when you're recruiting. You want your job ads and the way that you're recruiting to be targeting people realistically. So you want to avoid overly detailed job descriptions with a laundry list of elements that may not actually be required to do the job, unrealistic levels of experience. Think of how many entry-level positions say that 1 to 3 years of experience are required. If that was true for every entry-level job, no one would ever get entry-level jobs in order to get to the 1 to 3 years experience to get entry-level jobs. Again, unnecessary credentials. Education is necessary in some fields. If you're going to have someone build you a suspension bridge, you better make sure that they have an engineering degree. However, a lot of job postings require some amount of post-secondary, but that may not be necessary. It may, maybe they need the experience or the skills, and perhaps they might get that through post-secondary education, but they may get that other ways as well. And nice to have skills. It's important to identify those in your job posting as opposed to listing them as things that are absolutely necessary. And this is going to make your postings more accessible to people with disabilities, of course, because you're going to reduce the superfluous qualifications and things that are listed that may cause people to be screened out, whether they're screening themselves out or you're screening them out. But it's going to have a ripple effect and benefit other parts of the population as well. When we look at the differences between the way men and women apply for jobs, we see that women are not likely to apply for jobs if they have less than about 80% of qualifications listed in a job posting, whereas men are more likely to apply for jobs as long as they have at least 60% of the qualifications in a job posting. Don't know what the reason for that is. I suppose we men are more presumptuous, but you don't want to be screening out women just because you put a boatload of qualifications, many of which may not be necessary, right? You don't want people screening themselves out. You don't want to unnecessarily reduce your candidate pool. So consider how you're writing job postings and make them more accessible in that regard. So when you are welcoming diverse candidates, you want to use your own language. You want to make sure that they know you are welcoming for them. Now, you can use the Accessibility for Ontarians and Disabilities Act language that is mechanical and legalistic. It sounds forced, so I would recommend using your own language. It's more genuine, it's more sincere, so have clear diversity statements on your website, your job postings, and on print materials. You want to share that you offer accommodations for interviews and on the job, and identify how people can request them, at what stages during the recruitment process or the employment employment cycle, onboarding cycle. They'll be able to request those accommodations so they know the opportunity is going to be there. It's great if you can offer mentorships or internships, even mentorships by identifying employee mentors in the workplace for new hires. That way, people when they're in training are not always going back to the supervisor or the boss for more information. They can learn from people who are doing the job that they are learning how to do. Accessible websites are really important. The Web Content Accessibilities Guidelines states that written content should be perceivable and operable. And there are a couple other guidelines as well. It should be robust and it should be navigable. So there are 4 principles there under the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And basically it's saying that, your websites should be easy to navigate, the information should be easy to understand, and they should be easy to use. It should be clear when somebody follows a link where it's going to bring them, and you want that for your business as well, because you don't want people getting frustrated with your website trying to find information that is not where they think it should be based on what's listed there, and then going somewhere else. And as much as possible, show diverse employees in your digital and print materials and in your marketing. You employ a diverse number of people. There's no reason why all of your images of the workplace should be homogeneous. When it comes to interviewing and assessing candidates, there are a few things you can do. Obviously, state that accommodations are available. And if you can do that in multiple times and places, that's great. Certainly putting it on a job posting, as well as at the very least, asking people when you are scheduling interviews, do you require an accommodation? And in order for them to give you an accurate answer, it's important for you to notify applicants of what the interview details are, what the format is, what they can expect. So if they require an accommodation, they can let you know. You should provide the accommodations because in the end, you want to hire the best candidate, the person who is most well suited for the job. You don't want to necessarily hire someone who is most well suited to the standard interview format that you use. So being adaptable and flexible and providing accommodations for interviews will allow everybody to present themselves in the most effective way possible, and you'll be more likely to make a more informed decision about who to hire. And then when you plan the interview, use a structured interview. Same questions, same order, same assessment scale. Even if the process is being adapted or accommodations are being provided, you're scoring everybody the same way. Now, the things that are listed here are probably things that businesses are very familiar with. Important to have a list of questions based on the job description, right? You don't want to be hiring people to build bridges and ask them about flipping burgers. That's just obvious, but also develop ideal responses and attach a score to each answer. You want to be consistent in how you score multiple candidates. You don't want to improvise with it. If you can have an accessible interview location, this, generally you're looking at as much as possible having the interview in places that can be accessed level entry. If it's possible to be closer to public transit, that's great. Places where there are not competing sources, competing auditory sources, so not places where not in a shared office space or a crowded environment where there are competing conversations going on. Preferably a place that is well lit but doesn't have a great deal of visual distractions either. When you select an interview format, base the format on the skills and abilities that you're seeking, and again, adapt them by providing accommodations when people ask for them, including alternate interview formats. If your interview format is verbal and someone says they present themselves more effectively through writing, that would be one obvious accommodation. If you can allow people to demonstrate their ability to do the job in one way or another during an interview, that's also a great way to adapt the interview format. It depends on what job you're hiring for and how you're going to conduct your interviews. So here are some examples of biased interview questions, and some of these might surprise you, but I think you can understand why most of them are biased. I mean, this is a physical job. Can you do it with a disability? That's already making somebody feel like they are going to be screened out, and it also demonstrates a bias against having somebody with disability in a job, because there's an obvious presumption there that somebody can't do it with a disability. Never make that assumption. It may simply be that someone needs an accommodation and they can be just as effective or more so than other people in the workplace. Tell me about yourself. Some people have trouble speaking about themselves. This could be due to disability. It could be due to cultural norms as well. Think of certain Asian cultures, Japanese culture, where humility and being humble is more common than, say, here, where we are inclined to talk about ourselves and build ourselves up more. You don't want to disadvantage candidates simply because speaking about themselves and promoting themselves like that is something that they are not as good at. You're not hiring somebody to be able to promote themselves. You're hiring them because you want them to be able to do the job. What accomplishments are you most proud of? Why do you want this job? What motivates you? These are not good questions either. What accomplishments are you proud of? Depending on the job, this may be someone applying for their first job. They may not be sure what accomplishments they should be stating. And even still, the accomplishments they're most proud of may not be related to the job. Why do you want this job? What motivates you? Well, there are a lot of people whose answer to those questions may be, I need to make money, and making money motivates me. A lot of people conducting interviews are not going to find that answer very engaging, thrilling. So again, you don't want to hire somebody just because they're great at spinning you a yarn on the spot. You want to hire people who are able to do the job effectively. What kind of salary do you expect is an unfair question, especially if people are applying for jobs that they don't have any frame of reference for what the salary would be like. It risks people under selling themselves short, or potentially asking too much without realizing it. And puzzle questions like, if you were an animal, what type of animal would you be? That doesn't help you make a decision as to who to hire. Whether someone would rather be an otter or an ox makes no difference to how they're going to perform in the workplace. So consider your questions and ensure they are not only free of bias, but that they're also relevant to the job that you're hiring for. So common interview accommodations could be any of the following. I mentioned physically accessible spaces. That could be adjusted lighting, additional time for tests or answers. Providing questions in advance is a very common one, so that people know what they're going to be asked and have a chance to organize their thoughts before they attend the interview. Having a job coach come to the interview is also a good accommodation. Job coaches are not going to answer questions for people. They're just going to help rephrase questions or support the person to answer the questions themselves by reminding them to provide additional information, or, as I said, rephrasing or reframing questions in a way that makes more sense to the candidate, so that draws out the information that the interviewer is looking for. Scent-free spaces. This should always be the case. Perfumes, colognes, those things can be triggering, not just people with disabilities, but also people with respiratory illnesses, asthma and COPD. Anybody with those respiratory illnesses are going to have respiratory attacks triggered by colognes, perfumes, scented oils, incense, and all that stuff. Quiet spaces, again, I mentioned not hosting interviews in shared office spaces or places where there are competing audio sources. So you see a list there, and if you want, if you want more information, you can go check out the searchable online accommodation resource on the Job Accommodation Network's website. They have quite a long list of information on common accommodations for a number of different disabilities. Now, as we move to the onboarding and training elements here, It's important that you have an onboarding package that has all of the things that are listed there. I won't go through all of them, but the employee, when they start, should have access to all the salient information related to their job. It is also important to make sure that information is accessible. So you can provide the onboarding package in the standard format, ask people if they need any accommodations in terms of the way information is presented to make sure that they're able to actually review the information properly. Having all new hires complete individualized accommodation plans is great practice if you are able to do it. It allows you to identify accommodations in the workplace right off the hop, but it also, because if you have IAPs, you're going to review them at least, I would expect once a year. It gives an opportunity for people who need accommodations in the future, maybe things change, to identify that, right? People may not need an accommodation when they start, but maybe 1, 2, 3 years later, something changes and they do need an accommodation. If you have everybody complete IAPs and they're being reviewed at least on an annual basis, then everybody knows there's going to be an opportunity for them to mention changes that have occurred and new accommodations that may be required. So I will draw your attention here to the employment standard of the AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. For businesses with 49 or fewer employees, I should say, you see the elements there that they are required to be compliant with: recruitment and hiring, workplace information, talent performance management, and communicating accessibility policies. And there is much more information, obviously, on the AODA website, which I encourage you to visit. If you're not familiar with this, it will let you know exactly what you need in place for these things to be compliant. And if your organization has 50 or more employees, then there are 2 other elements, which is you need to have accommodation plans in place and an established return to work process. When you are creating accommodation plans, these are going to be written documents. It's going to be in writing. There's going to be access to them for the management team as well as the staff person. If it's requested, then information about accessible formats and communication supports needs to be provided. There should also be individualized workplace emergency response information. This may be the same for everybody. There may not be specific considerations to make, but for instance, I have a relative who's in a wheelchair, and the place where she works has to have a different emergency response protocol for her because they are in a multi-story building and she can't take the stairs if, say, the fire alarm is pulled. So this is what we mean by an individualized workplace emergency response. Providing accommodations, whether it's in the way information is shared, the workstation or the location that work is completed, scheduling, maybe the hours are different or flexible, structural, the way tasks are completed or which tasks are going to be attended to and completed by the person, and have a documented return to work process. Again, this is something that I think a lot of employers end up having to deal with at some point. So it's a good idea to have something like this already in place. Now, continuing with accommodations, we'll go through some facts. The main point to remember is that you're hiring somebody who can do the job. The way tasks are completed might be different. There may be some changes made to the environment to facilitate somebody's success, but in the end, you're hiring somebody who can do the job, and an accommodation simply enables them to perform the core part of their job to the best of their ability. And typically, they have no cost at all. Again, these are not extra or special treatment, and this kind of approach can be beneficial for not just people with disabilities, but a host of other demographics as well. We know that everybody has different learning styles, different ways of performing tasks. So if you're accommodating for people with disabilities and you get used to that, then you're going to be more flexible and more capable of providing accommodations for other staff as well, so that you can get the most out of your team. This could be assigning task completion based on the strengths of employees. Even if everybody has the same job description, it doesn't mean that they all need to spend the same amount of time on every task, because some people may be better at one task, whereas others are better at different tasks. This could be accommodating for people with English as a second language, newcomers, cultural and religious differences. There are many reasons to accommodate, and you're going to be a much more appealing and much more effective employer and have a much more productive workplace if you are employing these kinds of accommodation processes more broadly, so that the changes made potentially for people with disabilities are also going to benefit other members of your staff team. Now, when it comes to accommodations, remember there are changes to processes of the workplace so that someone with a disability can do the primary part of their job, really so they can do it to the best of their ability. Again, you're hiring somebody who can do the job. You're not going to hire somebody who, say, uses a wheelchair to do 5,000 jumping jacks a day. There's no accommodation that will make that possible. You're hiring somebody who can do the job. They just might need an accommodation in order to complete it more effectively. They might need to do the job differently. You see some examples of changes or adjustments here. They may address assumptions or stigma or language related to the person with a disability. You can also see how that might apply to different cultures or religions as well. Could be the way communication is provided. Could be checklists in order for people to stay on task. Closed captions for somebody who who needs that, who has trouble seeing what's on the screen. Maybe low vision. They don't have to be completely blind. Could be somebody with low vision. Simply speaking more slowly. I know I have a tendency to speak quickly, and if people are having trouble keeping up, then it may just be reducing the speed at which you speak. Providing tools such as screen readers or screen magnifiers for people with low vision or who are blind. An ergonomic workstation. You see a stand desk pictured on the screen here, which is something that is relatively common in an increasing number of office spaces, because we know that disability or not, spending 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for however many years sitting at a desk in front of a computer is bad for your back. And people who do that are going to develop back problems inevitably. So having a sit-stand desk where somebody can actually lift the desk up and stand and continue working is not only a great accommodation for the employee, but for the workplace, it means that there's going to be a better use and more productive use of time, because the alternative may be that at the top of every hour, people need to get up and stretch. And if the desk can't stand up with them, then they're not working for those couple minutes that they need to stand up and stretch. So, it's a win-win proposition. The work environment and spaces may be other areas that need to be addressed. A quiet space or noise canceling headphones for people who have trouble in noisy environments where there are competing audio sources and they're having trouble concentrating. Accessible washrooms. This is fairly common in a great many places. Scent-free workplaces. I explained why this is important, not just for disability, but also people with respiratory illnesses. Wider aisles so people can move about more easily. This could be for people in a wheelchair, could also be for people with a unique gait who move differently than a lot of the rest of us. Could be seniors who are using, maybe canes or walkers. And these could be changes that address processes. So flexible working hours, if that's available. Working remotely, this is an accommodation that's becoming really standardized as a result of the pandemic and the shift to remote work, and the experience of employers that people do remain productive, and it is quite possible to have people working from home. Modified interviews we've already gone through. So again, that's another obvious one, and I won't recapitulate the details here. If you are looking for information on potential accommodations or what it looks like when you're providing accommodations, how to hire inclusively, considerations to make, anything really related to inclusive employment and retention and recruitment, then here are a number of tools that you can use. I already mentioned the searchable online accommodation resource. The hashtag able2tapintotalent is a great resource as well. These are all free, by the way. The Able2 Tap into Talent is a micro-learning series that people can do at their own pace, and they can go through each module one at a time, save their progress, and come back. They also don't have to start from the beginning, so they can be a little more targeted if there are specific things they want to learn about. Microsoft's Inclusive Design is a great resource for how to consider communication in the digital space and in text media. So certainly recommend looking into these tools. Now, when you're speaking to a person with a disability, it's important to be aware of language. And language changes a lot, and there's language that applies to so many different groups. We can't be experts on all of it, but it's important to be aware of what is not appropriate as much as possible. I think we're all mostly aware of what's not appropriate for many different groups. I mean, we know to avoid racist terms. When it comes to people with disabilities, it's the same thing. And this again could be applied to other groups in certain respects as well. You don't want to refer to anyone in negative or disparaging ways. Suffered from, victim of, limited, confined. Those are all those are all they're all negative terms, right? They're all restricting somebody's value based on the way they're being referred to. Outdated terms, handicapped, stutterer, crippled, delayed, the R word, which I won't even mention here, are all words to stay away from. You wouldn't use the N word, you wouldn't use racist terminology when referring to different ethnicities, shouldn't use these terms to refer to people with disabilities. And inspiration driven. People, not everyone, but there are people out there who like to refer to people with disabilities or with other who have overcome other challenges in life as being special or courageous or inspiring or brave, and it's not helpful because these people are just living their lives. It's not that they're being courageous and getting out of bed in the morning instead of lying there withering away. They're living their lives just like the rest of us, and making them out to be superhuman somehow simply because they're living their lives and they have different challenges to face than the rest of us, again, is not helpful. It presents an unrealistic image. So just be mindful of the language. If you're not sure of something, ask someone, right? Going right back to the beginning of this presentation. If there's anything you're not sure about, it's better to ask. Obviously, ask respectfully and let the person know that you want to be respecting them. And so it's important that you have a better understanding of whatever it is you need to inquire about. And finally, once you have hired someone, you want to retain them and you want to celebrate your success. Obviously, providing ongoing supports and training. If you have those individual accommodation plans in place and something changes and somebody needs an accommodation now, whereas they didn't before, then making those changes. But also share your best practices and success stories. Share them across social media, share them within your organization. If you have internal newsletters, if you have external newsletters, share them there too. Best practices and success stories are great because they allow other businesses to learn from your example, hopefully emulate what you're doing. But it's also important because you want to promote the fact that you're successfully hiring and retaining talent with a disability, because 53% of people in the population are affected by disability, whether it's somebody living with a disability or a family and someone who has a family or a close relation with a disability. That's 53% of the population, and that's the majority of the marketplace. And there are studies out there that show that up to 87% of people would prefer to give their business to companies that hire inclusively. So it's also just good marketing, good PR to share your success stories with respect to hiring inclusively, so that you can generate more business. If possible, fund an employee resource group. Those are great in terms of providing value adds for employees. And embed inclusive hiring into your company. Make it part of your processes. As we've been through this roadmap, you can see how including inclusivity in every step of the recruitment and employment cycle is going to embed these practices into your organization. Now, if you need a roadmap, again, you see the link to our website here, plus the roadmap at the end. Certainly welcome to visit our website, review the roadmap on your own time. There are resources provided through every step, and every step is broken down into bite-sized chunks, so they're easy to review. And this is, again, available to businesses for free on our website. We'd highly encourage you to check it out and make use of it as needed. And you see the link to the general website here. The landing page has changed. I need to update this slide deck, but we'd welcome you to join us and use the platform to connect with job seekers with disability as well. And that is the end of the presentation. So thank you for taking the time to watch and to listen. I'll stop sharing my screen. And if anybody who is here has any questions, then you're certainly welcome to ask them.
I've enabled chat for our attendees. I would like to say that I found this just fantastic information. Really, the accommodations are something that we should be doing anyway. Some of it's what you've presented has been very insightful. I wrote it down so that when you said that the individual accommodation plans, that we should have an annual review in general, because needs change. I mean, a perfect example right here. Didn't need these a few years ago. And our plan, covers them and the anti-glare, so it helps with eye fatigue. But it's something that we're already doing. We just haven't acknowledged in a lot of ways that these are accommodations that we can bring into our everyday hiring and employment practices and being good employers. So thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. And I like your example with the eyeglasses. It's a very good one, and a very common one that I think people don't even consider unless it's pointed out to them.
Yeah, if it was 5 years ago, I wouldn't have needed them. So it's just one of those things, and we don't even. Of course, now I've done it myself, but of course I've also got it through our benefits package, which is something that I can rely on because my employer offers it. So it really, I just think that when you went through the different examples, not adding in unneeded requests in the job description was also fantastic. I've seen, I actually had an employer who was trying to hire, and they had brought me a sample job description. And I said, do we really need a 5-year history on this particular programming language? And they said, well, yeah, we think that 5 years is right. And I said, well, you realize that programming language has only been out for 3 years. And like, yeah. So it's not just about adding arbitrary numbers to make it seem, like a more important role, or that you'll get a even better than what you really need. It's also being realistic.
Yep. That's another really good example. That's actually quite amusing.
I was giggling at the time. I said, yeah, you're not going to find that. And as you said, a woman wouldn't apply because she wouldn't have that. Whereas a man might say, well, I've got 3, so let me apply.
Yeah, so let me do it anyway. Exactly. Yeah, you don't want to screen out half the population unnecessarily.
Yeah, absolutely. Unless our panel has any questions, I really appreciate you coming today. Thank you so much for this great information.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I hope people enjoyed it, and I hope the recording is valuable for those who watch it in the future.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again, and have a great day, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Madeline.
Bye.
Bye.